Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on all the social networks at Jethro Jones. And Transformative Principal is a proud member of the B Podcast Network. This podcast network has the best selection of educational podcasts for you. If you are in a role in education, there's a podcast there for you. And if you're in a role and you don't see a podcast, give me a call and let's make one together, because everybody deserves to have some great podcasts to listen to. I'm excited today to be joined by Casey Knudson, who is the MTSS Coordinator at the Northwest Educational Service District. Prior to this, he was a senior educational consultant where he focused on facilitating the establishment of inclusive classrooms, schools, and districts to effectively cater to the diverse needs of all students. He is a big fan of UDL and MTSS frameworks, and he has extensive experience in providing professional learning, coaching, and technical assistance specifically aimed at supporting the implementation of inclusive practices using UDL and MTSS. His background in educational leadership includes significant roles such as the Director of Teaching and Learning, Assistant Superintendent, Executive Director, Principal, Assistant Principal, and Teacher. Casey, welcome to Transformative Principal. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Well, we got connected because a couple of weeks ago I had Patrick Mongrain on the program, and he quoted you. And after he quoted you, I was like, I got to talk to this guy. So the quote that he said was that 2% of our teachers need evaluation and 98% of our teachers need coaching. And that just spoke to my heart, went right as a bolt of lightning to my heart, and that was right on. So let's start by having you describe the difference between coaching and evaluation and what that means in this context of this quote.
Yeah, well, Patrick's a great guy. He's doing some amazing work specifically around coaching. So I'm not surprised that did land with him. The statistics are pretty crazy across the state. Most recently, I was doing some work with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network out in Pennsylvania, and we got into this conversation about the shifting role of the principal and the necessary shifting role. And we looked specifically at the Pennsylvania data, and it hits right at about 98% rated proficient, right? So you've got all kinds of evidence. And if you look state to state, it's somewhere between 95 and like 98% of educators that are being rated proficient. And so what that tells me is there really are very few educators that need to be evaluated, right? So when I'm working with principals, I like to say grow versus grade, and that 98% of your staff need and want to grow and get better in the service of their kids. So if we're going to go with the grow versus grade mentality, then that does mean let's talk coaching, right? And let's really start to ramp up our capacity to coach. There is such little research that says we should be evaluating. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the Gates Foundation spent $212 million studying this, right?
It's crazy.
Yeah. And here's what they found, right? Teacher evaluations do not lead to improved student achievement. Teacher evaluations do not lead to improved teacher effectiveness, and teacher evaluations do not improve the retention rate of effective teachers. So talk about a lose, 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 and we continue to invest so much time and effort. I went down this rabbit hole.
Okay, let me ask you a question there, because if there's so much evidence that these don't do the things we want them to, why are we still doing them? What's your hot take on that?
Well, my hot take is people are actually trying to improve that practice, and um, I find that policymakers do tend to value accountability in and maybe hyper value accountability. But in the state of Washington, when we look at what we're trying to do with the evaluations, we've got these three really research-based professional practice frameworks, and we're trying to put a small percentage of our staff on comprehensive evaluation and a large percentage of our staff on targeted evaluation. And if you dig into the language behind targeted evaluation, it's coaching. It's agreeing on something within your professional practice that you want to get better at. And it's zero risk because you default to your comprehensive evaluation rating. So even if you stink it up that year while you're trying to, innovate and take this risk with the support of your principal, you're still going to be rated proficient. So I think we're trying to get better at it in some places, and I would give props to the state. We're still not leveraging that targeted evaluation to be coaching the way that we need to be coaching, and that could be a capacity issue with principals.
Yeah, so I agree with those pieces as well, and having been a principal prior to now in Alaska and Utah, had a different perspective on what they were trying to do, and there's a lot of similar efforts being made in that direction. But the reality is that I think you said it correctly, that policymakers hyper value evaluation. And Nick Fisher used this phrase. He said, this is the same reason why we do standardized testing. It is legislatively convenient to be able to say, here's your particular score or whatever. And even though everybody knows that it's baloney and that it doesn't really give what we're really trying to do in teacher evaluation or student achievement, we still do it because it's legislatively convenient to do that. And I think that teachers unions and they have a vested interest in this as well, and they want to be able to say, like, here's this process you have to go through to discipline or get rid of a teacher, and they want that to be a comprehensive, powerful thing that is onerous on the administrators who are trying to get rid of teachers. Now, that happens to so few, and to be honest, in my experience as a principal, it's actually easier to get rid of a teacher for their own bad actions than it is to evaluate them out, is what I would call it. And so it's like everybody understands this is a bad idea, and yet it's the best thing that we've got right now. And I appreciate efforts like Washington's to make it focused on that targeted evaluation rather than the comprehensive, and to not punish people and to make it risk-free to do some sort of growth. But I think you're absolutely right about the idea of principals not having the capacity to know how to coach their own teachers. And that's something that I work on with all the principals that I work with in my mastermind, of how do you help teachers through these things that they're struggling with, and how do you help them get better?
That's critical work. And when I think about, like, how do we induct new administrators into our school systems, and then how do we support them when they're there, I don't think we do a good job of that. I don't think we teach our principals how to have those coaching conversations. And one of the places where we kind of fall down too is we don't spend a lot of time talking about what quality instruction looks like. And this might be another thing that's legislatively convenient, and I love that term, and I wish it wasn't so darn applicable.
I know. Feel free to use it as much as you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will. I think about this the term would be precision over profusion, right? And so when we see what happens legislatively, every time we're talking about the school calendar and the school day, we're trying to add more seat time and more seat time and more seat time. And that's profusion, right? Whereas what we need to be valuing is this precision of craft. And what do we need our educators to be really good at? And it turns out they don't have to be good at a whole bunch of stuff. There are a few things that show up in the research over and over and over again. So I think a place where we can get more powerful and help our principals to be the transformative leaders that they can be is, let's talk about that precision. Let's help you have deep understanding of what quality instruction looks like so that you can help coach to that and toward that with your staff. Like that's a place where we need to, shift time and
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah. Well, there's this idea of knowing what high quality instruction looks like. And so in one district that I worked in, we created high yielding practices for educators, a HYPE certification that basically said, here are the things that you should be doing as a teacher to be effective. And those were very helpful because it made it very clear from our perspective, this is what you need to be doing. And if you're doing these things, then good results are going to come. You don't have to be perfect in everything, but if you do these things as best you can, that's going to be better than you just, trying to teach however you may have been taught to teach in whatever program, and how you like survive the day to day, which is a very real thing of what am I going to do with these kids today and how am I going to make it meaningful. And having principals trained in that also is exceptionally valuable. And one little caveat that I would add is that instruction is different than student learning. And if the focus is on instruction, then that's a little bit different than when the focus is on what students are actually learning, which is, a whole other conversation, but we're not here to talk about that one. But people who listen know that I have that little burr in my saddle, so I gotta make sure I get that in.
Well, okay, let's talk a little bit about that burr.
Okay.
First of all, I have to say, I bet you were a pretty darn good principal.
Thank you.
What you're talking about there, what you were establishing was what Anthony Muhammad calls the instructional floor.
Mm-hmm.
What's the minimum quality of
Exactly.
instruction that we can expect to see from class to class to class? And so the burr in your saddle there is a great burr to have. So I'm a fan of coaching. I think when you hold it up to anything else, it's the thing that changes practice. It's job embedded. It's happening in the space where the materials are within the context with your kids. And we know that quality coaching programs have a 0.49 effect size, which is moving into that medium to large effect size. It's on the other side of the hinge point for Hattie, right? And that 0.49 effect size on instructional practice results in a 0.18 effect size in student outcomes. So the implications there are that we've got to be pretty darn good at our craft in order to get to the student learning part of it. And then when we're thinking about what our precision of practice, it's leaning into those things that actually have impact on learning. So if we don't continue to center, like, what's the impact? Like, what's the student understanding and learning, and what are they figuring out how to do? Then we can hyper focus on a lot of practice, and that,
Exactly.
for me, that's part of where UDL comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we talk a lot about evidence-based practice, and you better be grounding your instructional floor in evidence-based practice. But then that evidence-based practice, in order for it to be high yield, has to be learner informed and universally designed. Because I can have an evidence-based practice like, let's say, student discourse, right? And opportunities for students to respond. But if I'm not looking at my kids and thinking about what do they need, in order to access that evidence-based practice, do they need pre-discussion opportunity? Do they need sentence stamps? Do they need discussion protocols? Because, they need supports. Their home language is different than the language of instruction. That's where we've got to be learner informed. That's the only way that evidence-based goes to high yield in our context and classroom. So keep that burr in your saddle and fight the good fight.
That's right. And so I love that approach of how you describe that, because the best practices in the world can still fail. And if it works for 95% of the students, the 5% of the students are still failures in that regard. And for me, that's not acceptable. And the great thing about the No Child Left Behind Act was that it was No Child Left Behind. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to its promise in the name, but that is truly the reality. We cannot be leaving kids behind and letting them squalor over here in this lack of learning because of whatever situations are preventing them from learning. Sometimes teacher action, sometimes teacher inaction, sometimes school policies. And we need to take all those things into consideration, because my approach is that school needs to be about learning, not about instruction. And that's one of those core beliefs that I have, that I'm not going to be able to be convinced that it's really about instruction, because it really should be about learning. But the instruction needs to be an important part of that. But to me, I always put learning over instruction as our priorities. But that doesn't mean that I think we shouldn't have good instructional practices. You know what I mean? Does that make sense, Casey?
It totally makes sense to me. And in my head, I have these three kind of drivers that I call the learner objectives, right? And for our system, what do we want our system to do? We want our system to produce kids that know how to be seen and heard in the world. We want it to produce kids that know how to function in the world, and we want it to produce kids that thrive in the world, right? So then that means in our schools and classrooms, we got to create contexts where kids are seen and heard, and they practice how to be seen and heard, where kids can function in the classroom and where they can thrive in the classroom. And so to me, that's being learner and learning centered. And then we think about what are the practices that help kids to be seen and heard, to help all kids, not some, to be able to function, and all kids to be able to thrive. That's our logic model. If we're not doing it in the context of our schools and classrooms, why would we think that all of our kids are going to be able to do this in the broader community? And we keep leaving a whole bunch of kids out of that equation.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that I've been, hammering again and again and again over the years. And what's so cool is we didn't know each other before we got on the call today, and yet I can see how we are very much aligned in these things, and the need for bringing all of our kids forward. So let's talk a little bit about what the role of the principal is in all of this. How does a principal who's got these somewhat Orwellian or just terrible evaluation standards hanging over their heads, how do they emphasize this idea of coaching instead of evaluation? What would be your advice to someone who still has to do these things besides just not doing them, which, we could talk for a while about how to do that. But that was my approach in a lot of situations, that I just didn't do the evaluation as they wanted me to do it because I knew that it wasn't necessary. But a lot of people are scared of doing that, so that's not the solution. But if you guys are listening and you want to chat with me more about that, just reach out and I'll tell you the secrets to doing that. But what advice would you give a principal in this situation? Got these evaluations, how do I manage it?
Okay, let me start a little bit bigger than that and just say this. Okay, that the principal is principal.
Yes.
The principal PAL is principal PLE.
Yeah.
And I think the research is really clear about that. And I kind of like to dig into Linda Darling Hammond's work around this idea that schools change life trajectories. So, individual pockets of isolated excellence do not change life trajectories, right? Uh, uh, it's everybody, right? It's the collective commitment. And when we follow that effect size and we look at what collective efficacy does for student outcomes, that's when we start to really work magic. So the principle is critical in creating a community, right? Equity requires community. So what is the role that the principal is playing in that? Here's the thing. I like to think of two visual models. One of them is the wagon wheel that puts the principal in the center of the wheel. And he goes out each of the spokes, or she goes out each of the spokes and works with each of the individual teachers, providing feedback, trying to help, improve practice. The other model is the neurologic model, the web of the brain, right? And in schools that de-privatize practice and take the principal out of the center of that wagon wheel and get people talking about each other's practice, get people into each other's classrooms, supporting each other in meeting those expectations are the instructional floor, that's where the magic is, right? So now you're trying to say, okay, I don't want to be the wagon wheel because non-negotiables and external accountability are something completely different than collective commitments and internal accountability. Non-negotiables and external accountability don't get you to collective efficacy ever. And yet here we have this evaluation system that is wagon wheel, right? So you have to figure out how to orient yourself in your one part of this de-privatizing practice. And so when you're going in, that you have to, right out of the gate, change the nature of the conversation with your teachers and say, this is a coaching conversation, right? This is figuring out how you want to get better. I'm one person in your life in this school community that can help with that conversation. I can be a connector. So if I have to be in here 2 times a year, right? But let's figure out who you want to have in here beyond that. Or do you need me more than that? Because we're creating a relationship that actually is one that's, based on radical candor and helping you to improve versus gotcha. Right. So I think you have to be transparent out of the gate and say, there is no gotcha here. This is, I'm one person in your life that can help to coach. If you're sitting in that principal chair and you've never received any professional learning, professional development around what it means to coach and what the different stances are, I think that's critical. And then thinking about like the language that we use is so important. How we figure out how to sit shoulder to shoulder with our teachers and have a third thing in the room, that's the thing that we talk about. Those are some of that skill set that we assume that you have just because you got escalated to that chair. That's part of the work, right?
Yeah, and I think an essential part of the work and helping. I really like that idea of the wagon wheel versus the node of a network. That is much more powerful for my problem with the term of the instructional leader in the school is that it assumes that the title assumes that this person is the be all and end all, and that's just not the case. And I've learned so much more about instruction since leaving the classroom and going into administration. Guess why? Because I've seen so many different people teach,
Right.
And that's not rocket science, but I love the idea of de-privatizing the instructional practices, because it's not like go in your room and close the door and nobody knows what goes on in there and these magical children come out. Like, that's not helpful to anybody. certainly not the kids. If they have one great teacher who hoards all the information about how to be excellent, that's not helpful to anybody. But if everybody says, hey, here are the things that are working, and here's what we're doing that's working well, and here are the non-instructional practices, but the community building, the relationship building, the what I call organic skills that you develop, which people typically call soft skills. These are the organic skills that we are developing in the classroom. Those things go so far to help improve everybody and raise everybody to a higher level. And that's how it has to be in order for us to really make those schools a place that does change life trajectories.
100% with you. And we could talk a lot about the research that you just nailed right there. But
but I try to make this approachable so that normal people who aren't researchers can say, yes, we can do this and it can work. But you're right. The stuff that I'm saying isn't just like, hey, I just pulled this out of thin air. This is stuff that actually does work and is valuable.
Yeah, for sure. When we drill down into this idea that precision over perfusion, we're going to name those few things that clearly, we've worked backwards from what our kids need and our student population. We're naming those things. Then to get to collective commitment on that, to have goal consensus, the role of the leader, really, they describe it as supportive leadership in the service of empowered teachers. And so you're supportive enough to empower the teachers to do this work together, right? And then the teachers work together to build this cohesive knowledge set and skill set that they're recognizing in their community is important. Turns out that the other leg of that stool, that three-legged stool, is embedded reflective opportunities to talk about your practice, which includes coaching, right? So the bringing us kind of back full circle, if you're a part of that process because you have to be as an evaluator, change your orientation for 98% of your staff and understand it as an opportunity for reflective, embedded, practice conversations. It's huge.
Yeah. And if you are actually in your teachers' classrooms and are aware of what's going on, you can very comfortably do that and still meet the requirements of the evaluation. And that is so key. The last question that I ask is, we've talked about a lot. So what is one thing that a principal can do this week, an action item, to be a transformative leader like you, Casey?
Well, I think the big thing right here is getting to de-privatization in our school, right? And I think getting out of that wagon wheel. And one of the ways that you do that is you think about the teams, right? Who are the teams of people that are doing the work in your school? And sit down for 30 minutes and do a teams audit. When do I have people meeting together in the service of student learning? And is it really happening? One of the things that I see that scares the crud out of me is when there isn't a school leadership team that is capturing the collective wisdom of the school community and processing that with the principal. I'll see these principals that are trying to operate as a lone wolf in schools, and it's just too complex a craft for that. So do a teams audit. I know that may sound a little bit kind of off track from what we've been talking about this whole time, but that's because community creates equity, right? And so you've got to be thinking about that, and how functional are those teams, and do they know what their purpose is, what problem they're trying to solve?
Yeah, I think that is perfectly in line with what we're talking about. Is you have to You have to take time to work on your school, not just in your school. And this is one of those things that you need to do, is you need to say, when are teachers required and supposed to be working in a team, and what are they doing during that time? And is that an effective use of their time? And heaven forbid I say anything bad about PLCs, but if your PLCs are not producing the kind of results that they should be, then you better do something to change it, because that is powerful, powerful time that can be used in a much more effective way if it's not getting you the results that you're looking for. And you just have to be aware that those structures may need to change, and you have to have the courage to walk in and change them if they're not providing what they need to.
Yeah. I mean, those need to be small group coaching conversations with and by colleagues.
Yeah, totally.
That run parallel with the coaching conversations that you're now going to have instead of evaluation conversations,
That's right.
And that you
Yeah.
just start layering those parallel practices and opportunities for educators to work with each other to get better.
Yeah. If your PLC meetings are just people looking at data, you're missing the boat. And it needs to be more than that. And I love how you said it, that it needs to be a coaching conversation with those teachers, that is what it's about. And I think we can have a whole nother conversation about that.
We could.
In fact, I need to see if that's my next book, is how to make your PLCs, put the coaching back in PLCs, professional learning coaching communities. There we go.
I love it.
All right, we'll see how this goes. Casey, thank you so much for being a part of Transformative Principal today. This was awesome.
Thank you. My pleasure.